First Grand Slam title, world #1 status. These are the things at stake on Sunday's final at Flushing Meadows for the US Open 2022 final between Carlos Alcaraz and Casper Ruud. Two extremely talented young players coming through on the men's side who have, well, I was going to say blown the competition away, but not without some trials and tribulations for sure. We're going to break it down. Before we do, remember to hit the like button and subscribe if you are new on YouTube. And also, if you're listening on a podcast platform, remember to leave a rating or review. Really does help us out. Thank you to everyone that is still liking the videos, supporting the channel. It really, really does help, and we are growing, so we do appreciate it. Let's get into this. Before I start, I want to also mention that we will be doing a live watch-along commentary for the men's final, which is, of course, Carlos Alcaraz versus Casper Ruud. And also, we will be doing a women's live commentary watch-along for Iga Swiatek versus Ons Jabeur. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break this down in 3 parts as I normally do. So the first part is going to be looking at their head-to-head previous matches, how they might have gone, what we can then take from it as well. Then also looking at their route to the final. And then finally with a strategic breakdown of how the match might play out, what to look out for. And I will be also catering in the mental and physical sides of things, which will probably be in the second part of the video, which will be when I go through the route to the final and how that might have an effect as well, because there's definitely some factors mentally and physically as well to cater in. It's not just a case of ability. Both players have played a lot of matches, some more than others in terms of hours, so on court. So it's definitely something to cater in and bear in mind, I think, when we talk about the final and how it might play out. So let's then first of all talk about their head-to-head. So they've actually played twice. They've also, unofficially played 3 times because they played in Hurlingham, which is an exhibition tournament in the UK. Ruud won that in straight sets, but it doesn't count towards their head-to-head. So the head-to-head is actually 2-love to Alcaraz. Once was this year in the Miami final, where Alcaraz won the final in straight sets, 7-5, 6-4. And then in Marbella in Spain in 2021, Alcaraz also won in straight sets. That was on the clay. So they've only played once on the hard courts. Alcaraz winning this year. I don't want to look into that a huge amount because I watched the highlights of that actually the other day, yesterday actually, because I thought, look, I remember watching it from start to finish, but I wanted to refresh my memory and get an idea of the Casper Ruud that played in Miami. Is that the same Casper Ruud as today? It's not. It's a very, very different Casper Ruud, especially on the hard courts. He's improved dramatically in the last 6 months on hard courts. For Alcaraz as well, he's definitely made improvements, whether they're incremental or drastic ones. He's definitely made some improvements, no doubt. Being only 19 years of age, he's evolving all the time. So then let's talk about the route to the final. So for Alcaraz, it was and has been a pretty tough route. At the start, it looked pretty good. He was winning in straight sets against Baez, Correa, Brooksby, and then Cilic, Sinner, Tiafoe, all 5 setters, played over 13 hours of tennis on court over those 3 matches. Had to save a match point against Sinner in the 4th set of that tie, then end up winning in 5. Tiafoe had a match point of his own in the 4th set in that match, and then didn't convert, had to get taken to a 5th set after losing the tiebreaker. One thing to bear in mind is that against Cilic and Sinner, the 2 sets he lost were both tiebreakers. He didn't actually win a tiebreaker in either. So I'm wondering whether he's building a slight reputation for not being particularly good in tiebreakers, and I wonder whether Ruud might take confidence from taking Alcaraz potentially to a tiebreaker, because Ruud is someone who does tend to have and play quite a few tiebreakers in his matches because he's a particularly good returner, as well as serving pretty well in his spot. So he doesn't normally get broken. But if he's playing against someone who is also serving very well, then of course you end up getting taken to a tiebreaker because neither can break. So he's just historically tended to have quite a few tiebreakers in his matches that have been tight. So something to look out for when we do watch the final. For Casper Ruud, and by the way, also Alcaraz playing against Tiafoe and Sinner, 2 potential match of the year candidates for sure. Ruud played Carl Edmund, beat him in straight sets in the first round, then Van Rijthoven in 4, Tommy Paul in 5. That was a fantastic match. I know he bageled him in the last set, but I think every set was a tiebreaker bar one, which Ruud won 7-5. And then Berrettini fell to Ruud in straight sets. Ruud playing some incredible tennis for the first two sets. Berrettini was up 5-2 in the final and third set, and Ruud somehow came back and went on to win it 7-6 in a tiebreaker. Again, another tiebreaker. Ruud Khachanov beat him in 4 sets, and guess what? There was a tiebreaker in there. So Ruud seems to be having tiebreakers left, right, and center. So I wouldn't be surprised if they have another tiebreaker in this match, because Alcaraz has been having tiebreakers too. We'll see. Right, so that's their route to the final. Now, how does that have a bearing, I guess, on the match? So there's a couple of factors. The first one is I talked about Alcaraz's time on court. He has had a lot of tennis played recently, and he hasn't shown any real issues. Like, he hasn't called the trainer, had to get stretched out or had cramp or, had treatment on something from what we've seen on court. Off court, he probably has had something done in terms of ice baths and rehabilitation and just making sure that his muscles are nice and loose. And, have the physio massaging working on his body at all times, making sure that he's going to be ready for this final. So from a physical standpoint, I'm hoping he's going to be okay. But if I'm being honest, I don't remember the last time someone won 4 5-set matches in a row to win a Grand Slam. I don't remember. It's probably happened, but I don't remember it. A lot of people saying, well, he's only 19 years of age, so he's fresh, so he'll be fine. Now, his ability to be so conditioned isn't really proportionate to his age. A lot of 19-year-olds tend to cramp up a lot because of the buildup of lactic acid. Their bodies aren't quite as mature, potentially as well. I would actually say if he was in his mid-20s, maybe late 20s, Alcaraz, then I could maybe understand it a bit more because he's at his physical peak. He's not at his physical peak yet. He's not. I say that. Generally, your physical peak is in your mid to late 20s. For Alcaraz, maybe he is peaking at 19. I don't know. Some people do. It's not as common, but it's possible. But generally, he has almost been superhuman in the way that he's managed to recover. So I'm wondering whether in the final we do see a more sluggish type of Alcaraz. Now, I did say he'd lose the first set to TFO, which he did, but it wasn't because he played badly. TFO played really well, I thought, in that first, and he lost in a tiebreaker. So again, could have gone either way. For Casper Ruud, he's not had as much time on court at all, right? So the last 3 matches he's played, he's only dropped 2 sets. So he's going into this a lot more fresh, with lighter legs, you'd imagine. So I guess we'll find out how it plays out. But I have a feeling that the start of the match, Alcaraz might look a little bit leggy, but he probably will recover and kind of get into his groove come the second set. That's my feeling anyway. Then there's the mental factor, which is, there's 2 things to talk about here. The first one is it's Alcaraz's first ever Grand Slam final. So there's definitely going to be nerves on his end, which probably, I think, combined with, of course, the potential hangover of the last 3 5-setters, might then compound him to play not particularly well for the first set or so, which means I would imagine, and I wouldn't be surprised if Ruud takes the first set. But who knows? Maybe Alcaraz comes out and blows him away, breaks early doors, somehow takes the first set with ease. You know what? I could be wrong. But that's just how I see it. So first ever Grand Slam final, he talked about nerves in his post-match interview as well, saying that, he's going to be nervous. There's a lot of pressure given that he's the favorite. So he's never won a Grand Slam title. He's never made a Grand Slam final. He's never been world number 1. It's his chance to win the Grand Slam title, first one, and become world number 1. The pressure on his shoulders being the favorite. There's a lot of different factors mentally going on here. Like, there's a lot of different things, moving parts. He'll be thinking about it. He will feel the pressure, no doubt. Casper Ruud. Now, for him, I actually think this is a great thing mentally for him because there's not really much pressure on him. Honestly, there isn't. People expect Alcaraz to win. So he's the underdog going into this, despite it being his second ever Grand Slam final and his second Grand Slam final of the year. He's the underdog. but he'll go into this slightly fresher. He'll go into this with an interesting outlook as well, because it's his second ever Grand Slam final, so he has the experience that Alcaraz doesn't. He knows what it's like to play on the biggest stage, and not just on the biggest stage, but against the GOAT in Nadal as well. So that should put him in good stead for this final in terms of a mental edge. And I actually think he might have a slight mental edge on Alcaraz when it comes to these factors. Because Ruud, as I said, has been there, done it. Well, he's been there, hasn't done it yet, hasn't won the t-shirt yet, but he's almost there, right? It's been a very good year for him. And as I said, yeah, no one expects him to win, I don't think. Well, a lot of people don't. But I think this is very close to being a 50-50, just because of all the outside factors, the physical factors, the mental factors, and also Ruud's been playing extremely well, no doubt as well. So I know Alcaraz is seen as the favorite, and I can see why, but I don't think he's as clear a favorite as people might think. I think it's more like 55-45, 60-40 if we're talking about percentage-wise. The other thing is then for Alcaraz and Ruud is how have they been mentally in terms of the matches. Now, both have been pretty ice cold, but especially Alcaraz, saving that match point against Sinner. He's fought through the end, and he'll fight. He'll fight. I mean, he will just continue, even if he's on one leg, his legs are cramping, he can barely move. He will try and adapt. He will fight. He might not win, but he will try. He will try and try and try. And that is, of course, a massive factor of his game, his competitive nature, which is similar to Rafa in the sense that he just doesn't give up. Defensively, he's extremely hard to break down, and he just will keep going and going and going and not just give up on points. For Casper Ruud, mentally he's been pretty good. I think he's been able to serve and play quite clutch in the big moments, and he's been quite clinical in some of the matches, especially against Berrettini. I was impressed in the first two sets. So he has a lot of confidence going into this final for sure. Right, let's then finally talk about it from a tactical and strategic point of view, and then I'll give you my prediction. So there's a few factors. We can talk about serve return dynamic first, and I think Ruud's serve has been much improved, but it's not on the same level as a TFO. It's not on the same level as a Sinner personally. His first serve though is quite close to both. His first serve, that is, and the reason why his first serve is not necessarily the actual first serve; it's the first serve point as a whole. Because normally he'll make his first serve in, and he will hit his spots. He won't go down the middle of the box. It's not a massive serve; it's big enough. But then it's what he backs it up with, and normally it's a forehand. And his serve 1+ plays is up there with someone like a Tsitsipas as one of the best on tour. It's an incredible combination. The forehand that he hits is normally extremely, extremely well struck with good spin, good depth, and really then puts the opponent on the back foot straight away. For Alcaraz, his returning has been very, very good, though. So I think, especially behind the second serve of Ruud, he will probably step in like he did against TFO, and he'll try to be aggressive on the second serve return. That could be where Ruud gets hurt quite a bit, so he'll be wanting to make a lot of first serves in for sure. He might try and target the Alcaraz backhand return, but that also looked a bit better against TFO. And I feel like playing against Sinner and TFO has helped gain some confidence on his backhand side. Well, a lot more than he had in the past, I think. He always knew it was a pretty good tool, but there have been some question marks around his defensive abilities and capabilities on the backhand side, including from myself. But as of late in the last very, very recent past, it's looked okay. It hasn't looked too bad. There's still some issues there, you can tell, but it's not as much or as big a problem as I thought it might be. So that's a good sign. For Carlos Alcaraz, he's been serving better as well. He's been hitting his spots, maybe not serving the 130+ that I saw from him early in the year or late or last year. But what I think he's done is he's hitting with a bit more spin, but also with a bit more accuracy. I felt like before he was hitting like 130 mile per hour flat down the middle of the box. Now he's actually hitting his spots, which is great to see. Ruud has also been returning well. Now, his backhand return is a bit weaker than Alcaraz's, but his backhand is much improved, and we'll talk about that in more detail in a second. But he's been returning extremely well, Ruud, as well. And the biggest positive for me is that he's not been standing extremely far back in a lot of the points. I know Alcaraz has varied his return position against TFO for the first serve at times. He was very far back. Against Ruud's first serve, I don't think he should be. I don't think Ruud will be scared to come serve volley. And if he does, then Alcaraz will be on the back foot. So I think he needs to close down that return position, make sure he's kind of locked in, he's not too far back. Similarly for Ruud, he's been doing the same thing. He's not being super far back. He's been kind of 2 meters behind the baseline for his first serve return, and it's put him in good stead. He's returned really well, I thought, aggressively, proactively, and had a lot of success. Of course, breaking Berrettini multiple times in the first 2 sets of that match. So something to look out for in terms of serve return dynamics. I also think both will try and serve volley at times, I think, which will be exciting to see. Similar to, I guess, the TFO match, we had 2 players, Alcaraz and TFO, who weren't scared to come to the net. They had a little bit of everything. Ruud as well now also has a bit of everything. He's improved his volleying, even a lot, and also his willingness to come to the net. He dictates with his forehand, then comes forward if he needs to finish off the point with a volley, and isn't afraid to come forward. So then we go on to the backhand to backhand dynamics and forehand to forehand and all the other different types of nuances. So backhand to backhand is interesting because we know that Ruud and Alcaraz will both try and make those backhands into forehands and try and go into out with the forehands or into in. Now, this is where it could get interesting because I think both are going to try and hit good angled backhands to make the other uncomfortable. And that might be why we end up seeing quite a few backhand exchanges. Unless, maybe both players aren't particularly comfortable hitting those types of angles consistently, then that's when Alcaraz or Ruud will then open up on the forehand side, and then, they'll get a bit more comfortable defending that forehand side than the backhand side for sure. What I would say is that Alcaraz's backhand looks really good for the most part against TFO. Hit some fantastic winners, some really, really good strikes. I think Ruud, unlike a Zverev or a Sinner, for example, or a Djokovic, is able to hit the backhand with a lot of topspin and a lot of pace to then kick up off the court. I think that is a positive for Alcaraz because I think he likes taking into his hitting zone. If it's shoulder height, he struggles to really attack with that ball. So that'll be interesting to see, but I think Alcaraz will have a bit more success potentially in that exchange. Then the forehand to forehand is interesting because both are going to try and dictate with it. Both have big forehands. I think, for Alcaraz, he's got all these different looks, which is incredible, and it just means that you're never quite out of the point for him anyway. And for Ruud, the forehand has been very good, different variety, and you can see that he's able to drag people out wide with his high topspin game. So we shall see how that pans out. I think we'll also see backhand slices from both players because they'll want to disrupt the rhythm of both and try and get a foothold in the point by, especially if they feel they're losing the point, to at least get back to neutral. So that's kind of how I look at it, and I think Alcaraz is a very natural volley at the net. For Ruud, not as natural, but he's getting there for sure. I think we're going to see a lot of points where both are at the net or one's at the net, trying to get passed, trying to get lobbed. It's going to be so exciting. I just can't wait. Both guys extremely fit, great defensively as well. So it's going to be a real high quality match, I imagine. My prediction is Alcaraz in 4 sets. I think he'll lose the first set to Ruud, and I think he'll get into his groove and win. But in saying that, as I said, it's Ruud's second time at a Grand Slam final. It does make a difference. It really does. Alcaraz is first. If Ruud were to win, I wouldn't be too surprised, honestly, because I think he has an ice cold head on his shoulders at the moment. So you know what, the sky's the limit for both players. But what a tournament it's been. Make sure you tune in to our live commentary for Alcaraz versus Ruud. Thank you very much, guys. Stay safe and well, and we'll see you on the next video.